that button. And there we go. The REFEDS community chat today, September 14th, if you're on this side of the date line. And we're going to be talking about federated identity management for libraries and what's been going on in that space. Jos Westerbeke is here to talk about that. And with that, I shall pass it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Heather, for inviting me here. I will share my screen now. I have some slides prepared for you. Okay, so yeah, about FIM4L, Federated Identity Management for Libraries. Our initiative was born about in 2018. It's from the library space, so to say. You know that libraries do provide many databases, etc., and all kind of e-resources, and they are used to do that based on IP based access, IP address based access. Now, as things are changing towards federated access and single sign-on, as you know, libraries do have concerns about that because of the privacy, and that's the reason behind FIM4L. Libraries share a principle protecting academic freedom, and they are okay with authentication, but it should be managed in the right way, protecting your privacy. And the FIM4L working group helps libraries with this by providing recommendations. We serve a global community, and we are based as a working group at LIBER. LIBER is the European Association of Libraries. And yeah, we are born as a spin-off from the ARC project. That said, we have close ties with Seamless Access and REFEDS and Gian. And as I said, we are a library-led community for librarians. What we are trying to do is create awareness among the librarians and explain the possibilities and serve the library community with recommendations for libraries, for the IDPs, but also for the service providers. And the first thing we managed to make is the recommendations. It's what you see here is the first version. I can say that we already have a second version. It's about to be published. So watch our website. The recommendations we made for the libraries is to guide them when they choose to use single sign-on federated access. So version 2 is coming. And the recommendations' core principles can be summarized as federated authentication is a viable alternative to IP-based access with a strong set of benefits for libraries and publishers. But again, a correct configuration is key to successful operation of a single sign-on connection. And user privacy should always be protected. The most important thing of our recommendations, the most important parts, the chapters are 4, A and B. And that's about releasing a transient or a persistent alphanumeric identifier. The transient is also called the anonymous, and the persistent identifier, we call that the pseudonymous identifier. So that aligns now with the REFEDS entity categories. And in version 2, we renamed it to anonymous and pseudonymous access. So that's great. As I see that you are using the same wording, and we looked at you, and probably you looked at us. I don't know, but we managed it to use the same wording now. That's great. What we don't do is to recommend a choice between anonymous or pseudonymous. We let it to the library to choose, but we tend to choose pseudonymous. There are a lot of reasons to choose a pseudonymous persistent identifier because of the possibilities it creates to build a profile. And yeah, I was asked to talk a bit about where is FIM4L at this time. So where are we now? We just finished some talks with Elsevier, and that was about what we called agile access, and the talks were about whether there's a possibility to have one connection, single sign-on connection, and whether it's possible to choose to release an identifier or even non-identifier at all. It works at the Elsevier site in some sense, but it doesn't work for all the products of Elsevier. You can read the results of these talks at the blog post on the Libre website. I think I shared the link. Otherwise, I can do that in the chat here. Let's do it in that. I don't see it here. I'm sorry. No. Okay, go ahead. I will share it soon. So you can read it. That are very interesting talks, not only about technical things, but also we realized that there's more to do for librarians when we choose to make our resources available by single sign-on access. Like it results, as I said, anonymous works for some products, some not. You cannot change during a session, so you can't log in anonymous anymore after a pseudonymous session. And there's a need for building trust between libraries and publishers to solve the difficulty. So that is one of our results, an important thing. We need to work together, to be short. And this can be done by contracts and technical transparency to, so that's, it's important to know what we are doing, how it works, etc. And then, we are asking ourselves, maybe a code of conduct for libraries is a possibility, or something like that. And what we also need to do is create user awareness and communication. That should be a part of the single sign-on implementation for libraries. Yes, so that's a short presentation from my side. I think I have said now everything. Let's look.
Thank you, Jos.
Yeah.
I have questions.
Yeah. Okay.
I suspect other folks may have questions too, but I'll kick off. So one of the conversations I had early on with some librarians was that they felt that all the expenses were happening on the library side when it came to Federation, and the end result was making life easier for the publishers, and so they didn't see that the motivation was such that they wouldn't get as much out of it as the publishers did, and yet they were the ones paying the publishers, so they didn't feel motivated. Is this something that you've encountered at all? A pushback that this isn't actually as helpful to the librarians as it should be?
I don't know. It's a bit difficult. If we see, if I look at libraries and the publisher, when I set up just one federated single sign-on connection, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of emails for just one publisher, and then I experience something like they are pushing something, or no, it's just it take a lot of time to establish it. So yeah, it takes a lot of money. Yeah, but it's quite difficult for a library to establish only just one connection, and we can do it. We can begin with the biggest publishers, and that's okay. That we cover a lot of databases. Yeah, but yeah, it's a lot of work.
My experience as an IDP operator has been that, and this is going back a long ways, because we more or less moved away from using our stuff with the libraries for a long time. And that hasn't really changed to this point, but on the idea that it might change, the biggest challenge that I would run into really was just a lack of consistency across the vendors in terms of adopting the standards that we had tried to put into place. There were tons of vendors trying to use affiliations, which was just a terrible idea. There were, not supporting the entitlement that we had defined. There were a lot of vendors that weren't an in-common, in our case in the US, but, translate to whatever, trying to do things outside the scope of, the federations. They were trying to do it as a manual one-off, each time set up individually, which is not, it really doesn't work in the library space because there's too many vendors. So if you're trying to scale it up to actually move away from proxies, you have to have that automation in place through the federations. It's one of the few business sectors where it's not just a nice thing to have, it's the only way it will ever work. And in the US, the cloud doesn't do things that way. The cloud is bilateral everywhere. And so the library vendors that were adopting this solution, in a lot of cases, other than some of the early big adopters like Elsevier and some of those, were all pushing bilateral because that's how it was done. That's how you did things with the other, solutions. And I think a lot of them were geared towards corporate access as much as, if not more than, university access in some cases. So for those corporate solutions, there was nothing they could do. There were no automated options for them to do it. So I think the big push needs to be on that side of consistency. The entity categories certainly help with that in terms of doing personalization versus not personalization. So that's a huge step forward. Obviously, at the time, we weren't really looking at personalization because that was never a big deal. at the time that I was playing around with it. So there's more pieces in place to do it now, and I think we understand the problems better now, but I don't have any notion, since I haven't really been paying attention to this sector much, if things have really changed in terms of the vendor's approach to adopting federated access. And I think that's going to be the big key. It, like you said, it's not a big marginal cost for us to support libraries if it just works, but if it doesn't just work, it goes from difficult to impossible, because there's just too many of them to try to tackle them all one at a time. So I think that's, I guess I'm saying, the federations maybe are going to need to be a big piece of this in terms of pushing the vendors in a common direction and making sure that we're all on the same page.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's difficult, and that's why what we're trying to do as a FIM4L group to make it easier for libraries and publishers to have some configuration, some recommended configuration for both. Then you can refer to it, and if you have a talk with a publisher, if as a library, then you can refer to the document like, yes, this is how we want to establish our connection. But yeah, maybe it's a bit easier, but it's still a difficult thing.
Do other folks have questions?
I have two questions for you. Hi. So I have two questions. One, so you said the library say it's difficult. So difficult to set up, which we know it is, but is there any comparison being done to how much maintenance, for example, do they require when they are using IP access or any other type of access to access the other resources? So yeah, setting up federated access is a lot of work, but how does that compare to other types of access? And so that's one question, and the other question would be like, is there anything that publishers such as us can do more? Like, how can we help in order to promote the scalable federated access? Because I firmly believe it's in everybody's interest, but I don't know what can we do in order to help scale with, like, especially with other vendors that either use FA in a very different way than what academia did in the last 15 years, or they simply just don't know better, right? Because they're not aware
Yes.
of the space.
Yes. I first of all, I think that vendors do a lot of good work, and they help us, and like Elsevier, they do a lot of good work, so they help us. But compared to, as you said, IP-based access, yeah, there are two ways of IP-based access. The classical IP-based access is based on campus access. When you are on the campus, you have an IP address from university and you have access. So it's very easy. It's just, yeah, they give the IP addresses of the university, the range, to the publisher, and that's it. You just have to register it at Elsevier at your site, as you know, and that's it. And you don't have any more work to do. But there's another thing for off-campus access. We use an easy proxy server, and the easy proxy server is kind of the same thing, but you just have to share one IP address, and then you're ready with the publisher. But yeah, you have to maintain your own easy proxy server. Now many libraries use the easy proxy server of OCLC, the cloud version, so it takes not that much time, but you still have to maintain it. And sometimes when you speak about abuse or something like, you know, not conducting as it should be your resources, then yeah, you have to figure out the problem, and then it takes a lot of time to look into log files to find the user who is not behaving as it should be, you know, that kind of thing. That took also a lot of work. That's probably easier when we use single sign-on authentication only. So compared to each other, then IP-based access is for a library very easy to maintain.
Because I know that, so and knowing from experience, but I don't know how does that feel from within an institution, but knowing from experience that IP ranges also change. So you're right about proxy. If it's just one IP address, it's just one IP address. But when you're talking about campus and users just getting access just like that, the IP ranges also often change. So someone has to maintain the new IP ranges with all the vendors, right? And for some institutions, that I assume must be a lot of admin work as well.
I don't think they change anywhere near as often as you might think.
Yeah,
You
it's in
don't?
10 years, we changed it 2 times in 10 years. So
Okay.
it's not
OSU has 2 or 3 class Bs that have probably never changed in 30 years plus. So it's obviously we're big and that's a special case, but I would guess most of the smaller ones don't change much either unless they're paying an ISP for access or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it does depend. The large, like the R1s, so many of them have their own IP ranges that they own. Though a few years back, MIT sold some of theirs and didn't tell the libraries that they had done that, which made things a little fraught for a little while. I think it might change more often with the smaller ones, like where I went to undergraduate. There's no way that they had anything other than something through an ISP.
Our approach was pushing people through the proxy in all cases. There was a I think we do it less now because I think the site's changed, but there was for a time, and I think it was the right thing to do, there was a big push for consistency to just tell people, look, go here, do this, use these URLs. If you get people used to doing that, then you've got one address or a pool of addresses. It doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter the circumstances. Yes, they have to log in, but you know, you get over that point once people got used to logging into stuff online, and it got to the point that people became very conditioned to it. And so that, you know, for a small school, that would easily be the obvious solution to, you know, make it less of a problem for them.
I
So
was
it's-
going to
so how is-
suggest
Sorry,
that-
go ahead. Jada.
I was going to suggest any experience of libraries changing their IPs more frequently may possibly be because they're changing proxies. So the campus network, they think, is stable, but I don't know how frequently they may move from one proxy to another proxy. I believe they'd have to add new, if they were using hosted Easy Proxy, for example, that IP range would be a new IP range.
Yeah, you mean a new IP address from one hosted
For the
IP
hosted.
hosted easy proxy server. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that IP address will not change, but
Yeah.
we have just one IP address for our easy proxy server, and that's stable.
That one will not change, but what does happen is if people move from an on-site, an on-campus easy proxy to the hosted version, then they often need to change into a new address. And that indeed then translates into work because you need to update that IP address at every publisher.
Yes. And there's a tool, as you know, which helps the publishers, IPregistry.org, I guess. It will help publishers whenever there's a change in the IP address at the library.
Of course, none of that actually helps the off-campus use case unless everybody remembers to set up their VPNs or to go through the correct website, and then always go through the correct website to get to the material that they want at the different publishers.
Yeah.
I think
And
another key difference between IP authenticated access and federated is that in many cases that I've come across, federated access is administered by the campus IT, whereas the IP access can be administered directly by librarians, which makes it easier for them to to make changes.
Well, but
So-
I think so. The IPs are also maintained by the campus IT, right? If campus IT changes the subscription model, then library is just on the receiving end of the changes. The library doesn't really have to say anything about it, right? So they will have to update the IPs with all the vendors.
Well,
Yes,
I think the
that's
difference
true.
is they control it, right? They control making that change with the vendor, where they don't necessarily control making changes with vendors when it comes to federated access.
So can I ask two things here, or make ask one thing and make an observation about the other? The question is around IPv4 exhaustion. So with my, I used to be a network operator hat on, like it is increasingly difficult for people to get new IPv4 space. And my experience of publishers is that they have no clue what IPv6 is. And the people going through gateways in that, you know, this is, there's a mismatch here. And you know, the FIM solution kind of deals with that to some extent, in fact, to a very large extent. But you know, what happens when we have subscribers who only have v6 addresses? So that's the one thing. The other thing is just an observation from an emerging economy, which is that the easy proxy thing often leads to network routes that are terrible, because you get things hairpinning through another continent and back twice. So if we have a student on a mobile network here and that mobile network is not peering properly, we're hairpinning from South Africa through Amsterdam 9,000 kilometers and back, and then going through a proxy and then going back to a publisher who's overseas. And that leads to a terrible user experience. Well, that was just an observation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are advantages to use single sign-on. That's true, and I think we will go that way. But yeah, you know, it's a long path. So there are many advances. When it works great, single sign-on, and people expect it. They just can log in on the website on whatever device they use, and they know how to do it, and they have access when they are off campus. And you know, it's all that's always a bit difficult with IP based authentication when you are not on campus. So I think it's a good way. It's good to go ahead and to make it workable for a library to use federated access.
Well, I think we're all strongly in favor of federated access. That's kind of why we're here. Judith.
I was wondering, Jos, if FIM4L has been raising the issue of guest access with publishers, or the idea that a license may be represented by more than one IDP. So that is a piece where I think Seamless has had to struggle a little bit with, I go to a resource and, oh, look, there's my institution twice. And part of that is, for example, I've been working on this recently, so it's very front of mind. A medical school may be supported by the library at a different university, and I need to not look for my medical school, which, who knows, may be part of the Federation. I need to look for the institution, which is the library instance of the sister university, because then I can use my IDP to log into the Open Athens IDP that then makes the one. So is there any discussion about publishers being aware that one license has more than one IDP.
Yeah, no, it's not discussed within FIM4L, but I think it's discussed in the seamless access working group of wave ambiguity or something like that.
Wave disambiguation.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question of, so the reason, well, not the reason, but a reason there's the disambiguation problem is because libraries often support a broader community than just the home institution. And so libraries need to have, as long as publishers are saying only one IDP per license, then libraries need to put up these proxies that funnel together different identity sources to create that one library IDP. If publishers were able to support multiple IDPs per license, then the disambiguation might be less. Libraries would just need a guest IDP for their guests, or they could refer to the partner institution IDP and include it on their license.
I'm not sure, but I think that most libraries use one IDP, or better to say most universities. And I think they like to use just one IDP for security reasons and for the easy to maintain it. So that's what I think. We at least as Rotterdam University and many other universities in the Netherlands has just one IDP for students and staff also, for all together, just one IDP for one university. But we have still our university and the medical institution, the same university, but that combined are two completely separated IDPs. That's true.
Right.
That's
so
true.
I'm just aware that a significant fraction of hosted easy proxies are configured to have multiple identity providers. And so those hosted easy proxies are hiding a multiplicity of authentication sources.
So I note in the chat, Rui notes that in Brazil, they also have only one IDP per university. All cases are valid and all cases are pretty much everywhere. You know, if you can find an example of just about anything in the wild, I think. Meshna?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say, so yes, so and you, Heather, can speak more about that, about the wave disambiguation, and I'm actually not sure whether the document, the recommendation has already been published, or
It has.
Oh, has it?
It has. It's on the Seamless Access website.
Seamless Access website. Okay. So at that time we've identified at least 100 universities, so 100 institutions that have more than one IDP, or that you as a user you'd go to WAVE and you would wonder which institution to select now if you want to sign in. So I think as it's becoming simpler and the software is cheaper and it is becoming simpler to implement IDP, we can probably expect more of that in the community. But I think that's just the next problem that we need to solve, because from the user perspective, at least if the university is using the IDP, the student can still go to the vendor and navigate to the IDP and sign in like that. Whereas if they are using just a proxy, there's nothing the user can do. Once a user has landed at the vendor, they will not be able to get access without leaving the vendor and then going somewhere else, figure out how to come back, right? So, and I wonder whether like, is this wave really such a big problem? Because Scott said earlier, well, so if we use a proxy, we just need to teach a user, right? So we need to teach a user this is what they need to do, and eventually the user gets used to it. So is it more difficult to teach the user how to use Wave and how to sign in and which IDP to use?
I was
kind of is.
suggesting.
It,
Go
kind
ahead,
of,
Scott.
it kind of is, because we control the UI of the proxy. We don't control the UI of the vendors. So we can't, we want the vendors to be consistent, but we have no ability to make that happen, or quite honestly, based on my past experience, a lot of confidence that it's going to happen. And so it's not really within our ability to influence the way that flow works enough that we could, you know, do the necessary training and all of that. Certainly over time, if it does crystallize, then we can teach to that. But right now we can only teach to, you know, the parts that we actually control.
And there's another difficulty to teach users like students, because they at these times they are more on their journey on the internet, on their research journey. They will come upon a website not through our discovery system or LibGuides or other systems from the library, but they just will come upon a website like Elsevier, and then they have to authenticate, and that's very difficult to go back to Easy Proxy and to use Easy Proxy. There are tools, I know, like Lean Library, etc. But yeah, you know, it's if a student begin on our university, they know when they are on the website that how to authenticate on a website. They are just looking for a login button, and if they see that you can log in with your institutional account, and they will find the account of their university, then you don't have to teach them. They just click and log in and have access. So that's the other part of the side of the coin.
Right. And where I was trying to call attention was that to make that simpler for the users, right now, publishers have this sort of, you have a license and you have a range of IP addresses. Will publishers be able to say you have a license and you have a list of authenticating entity IDs, more than one? Or are publishers, the more often publishers assume that's one-to-one for one license, one IDP, the more you then put this challenge on the part of libraries who represent perhaps not just a community behind one IDP, but a community behind multiples. And so that were libraries able to say, hey, here are my 3 IDPs, you know, any user from these 3 IDPs, entitlement as appropriate.
So
yes, I think that's part of the
possible.
talks when we have what we have as a library with the publisher. We
Yeah.
just need to talk about that and about the possibilities, and that's what I mean with a lot of work. So it's not just the single sign-on connection, but there are so many things you have to think of before it works. And it's on one side technical, on the other side it's also the contract language you have to adjust when you make these kind of connections because of privacy, etc.
Guy points out in the chat that between low bandwidth, NAT, and IPv4 exhaustion, that already means in some places the IP addresses don't necessarily have a one-to-one relationship with licenses. So there you're seeing gateways and proxies too.
Well, and that's where the libraries are doing, you know, how do we make this easier to solve when we switch to SSO? Right now, the libraries have to figure that out. The publisher just says, give me your ranges, and making sure that the publishers keep it from being a one-to-one, but a one-to-many would help ease that switch
yeah, at least like Elsevier, they can manage all kind of connections, so to say, all kind of authorizations, from IP to just one user account, federated access, all kinds of authentications for just for one license, so to say. Yeah.
I was just aware of a customer who's setting up Open Athens so that they can bring their partner medical school users in to authenticate, do single sign-on to resources, as well as their user body, and that's putting those two SAML IDPs behind.
Yeah, and Open Athens is a bit something like also kind of a proxy, so to say.
Right.
It's some kind of middleware,
Right.
and the benefits of it for a library is that you can manage your users all together from different institutions together in Open Athens. So it has some benefits, but also disadvantages. So yeah.
Yeah, but Open Athens, so I think the greatest advantage is that it's already integrated with such a large number of vendors that you get the whole package, right? There's a lot of integrations that you don't have to do because they've already been done. So you just need to enable, and it's still a lot of work, but it's incomparably less if you're running your own software, right? The IDP on your own software.
But it's that piece then, as you point out, then you start promoting this increase of, I have my institution IDP in the Federation and I have my libraries IDP in the Federation. And you're promoting, if you're relying on libraries using a proxy to pull together their multiple communities into one IDP, that's when you're that's a reason you can create this multiplicity that you have to disambiguate between.
So Jos, you said that the next version of your recommendations were coming out real soon now. How soon's real soon?
You know, I just received this morning an email with the final PDF from Lieber, our office liaison. So it's there already, and we just look at it as a last view, and it all seems good. So yeah, you know, it's going to be published, I think, within a week or something. I don't know. I can't promise anything, but it's coming soon.
But real soon now on the order of weeks as opposed to before the end of the year, months.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's just weeks. Okay. Within 3 weeks, then it must be published. It's not that many work now, so it's coming. And then yeah, it's the same wording as I said as the REFEDS. So it's very nice that we see now. Yeah, that we are on the same route, so to say, and yeah, maybe it's good to say that we, as the FIM4L group, we are focusing more on the privacy. So what we are looking at is at those two entity categories of anonymous and pseudonymous, because they will protect your privacy. They can protect your privacy. Both of them can protect your privacy. If you choose for personalized access, then it's quite another thing. That's not what we are working on for the common library databases access, because that's what we are saying. What we are talking about, whether to use IP address based authentication or federated access. It's it must be in an anonymous way, whether real not anonymous or pseudonymous. That's no problem. So that's what we are looking at, not that much at the personalized access category.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
to make it more simply, we would like to have just one connection which you can use for both anonymous and pseudonymous, or which you can use by sharing an identifier or even nothing as an attribute in the SAML protocol, so to say. If that's possible, that makes it a bit more easier to configure a single sign-on connection. And that's what we called the agile access method. And I, as far as I know, Jiri is, I don't know if Jiri is here right now, but no, he's not here. Okay, but he joins your sessions, and Jiri is a close participant of FIM4L, so we have a closer relationship, so to say. And I see that REFEDS is also busy with to put it together, but I don't really understand it, to put all the identities together as one, what we called agile, but you call it maybe another name, but to make it easier.
Sure. So a couple things about that. First, the anonymous, pseudonymous, and personalized access are going to go out for consultation within the next few days. The only reason it hasn't been done yet is because I've been traveling, but they're ready to go. The fourth one that we've been talking about came out of research collaboration use cases, where what they want to do is be able to, with a single entity category, say, we really want personalized, but if you can't give us that, we can give you a slightly less level of service if you give us pseudonymous, right? You'll get service one way or the other, but the level of service will change. And they wanted that in a single entity category. We were calling it like a fallback mechanism of, if you're not willing to give personalized, then give something, because it will still help the research collaboration offer some kind of content back to the user who's doing the requesting. We had thought to, we explored, could we put that in the entity categories, as it were, and the feedback we got at the REFEDS meeting in June was too complicated, make it simpler. So we'll talk about the fourth entity category. We weren't looking at falling back to anonymous. This was between personalized and pseudonymous. If there's a use case of pseudonymous to purely anonymous, I'd love to hear what that might be.
That's very difficult, because we talked about it with Elsevier, and it will break the system, so to say, because it's even it's technically possible, but it hits the user experience.
Yes, I can't imagine that being a thing, but all use cases are out there somewhere in the world. If someone actually has a valid use case along those lines, I would be curious about it. Andy, I want you to post that question on the RNS mailing list. All right. Do we have any other questions about FIM4L?
I have one more, or a remark, I think, or it is, I'll phrase it as a question. Looking back at Guy's question as well about Africa and or countries where maybe IP addresses are less available, etc. I don't have the exact member list of FIM4L in my head, of course. Maybe Jos knows more. Do we have involvement from libraries from other continents, or is it mostly Europe and US that's involved now?
Mostly Europe and US, but also Africa. Also, I would call it the federation, some federation of Africa, a known federation. I don't know its name. but yeah, it's still, they are still on board.
Okay. Otherwise, it might be good to also think about if we can get that, if we can get more of them on board to, yeah, make sure that these issues are addressed as well from this group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Asia is where V4 exhaustion is a big issue.
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't quite
He
catch
said
what you
Asia is
said.
where IPv4
Oh.
exhaustion is a big issue.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. All right, Jos, thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. Everybody, thank you for coming in and asking good questions and listening to the conversation. Wait. Sure, Andy. We have another chat scheduled for next month. That's going to be on MFA assurance. I haven't scheduled one for November yet, but I have ideas. And then December there will be the REFEDS meeting at TechX in Denver, Colorado. And I do hope to see some of you there. If you have questions between now and then, we have the REFEDS Slack, we have the REFEDS mailing list, and I'm on them all the time. So would be happy to entertain any further questions or suggestions at that point. With that, I will stop the recording. Stop. Nope, not that button. It's the other button. This button.